Thanks to the Strong Towns chapter leadership for inviting me and helping arrange this. I will start tonight here. The state of the world is not good. A fair number of things are literally on fire at this moment. Given that 90% of democracy is people showing up to things, thank you, sincerely, for your participation in the extended democratic process by being here tonight for this discussion about property tax reform in Richmond, Virginia. Or as the case may be, thank you for watching this presentation later on YouTube. Over the next 20 minutes or so, I'll go over what split rate taxation is, why anybody interested in any of good government, healthy cities, or economic justice should support this. I'll go over the history of, in recent years, of the politics of property taxes in Richmond, the status quo today, and the prospects for reform in Richmond in the medium to long term before we move into the Q&A portion. Okay, that's that. So what is split rate taxation? In short, you are lowering the tax rate on any improvements that are on a given parcel of land. Usually these are buildings. They can also be other forms of infrastructure. In order to make up for the resulting decrease in revenue that a locality would see, you increase the tax rate applied to the underlying value of the land. There are direct effects of a transition to split rate taxation. There are many indirect effects. This would encourage quote unquote gentle densification across most of the city. If it would encourage densification at a more rapid rate than that anywhere, it would be in places like downtown where there's a lot of like surface level parking that's relatively underused. And in those areas, and along commercial corridors as well. Those areas of the city, especially along the existing east-west bus rapid transit route, the upcoming north-south bus rapid transit route, those are the areas that are most able to accommodate additional density and which a transition to SRT would most move the needle in ensuring that there are X number of additional units in a proposed development along those corridors or downtown, in comparison to the current property tax model. In full disclosure, I'm not an economist, a lawyer, an accountant, or most other things that could qualify me to make authoritative policy recommendations. On this and other complicated topics, I try to defer to the expert consensus if there is one, and in this case, there is one. My support for land value taxes stems from the broad consensus among economists that they are overall a better way for governments to raise necessary revenue than just, for example, the current property tax system that we have here in most localities in Virginia. This is a position endorsed in one form or another by economists across the political and ideological spectrum, all the way from Karl Marx to Milton Friedman. The latter said about land value taxes, quote, "The least bad tax is the property tax on the unimproved value of land," end quote. And from Milton Friedman, that is a pretty ringing endorsement of a tax. The pictured survey from 2023, which was polling leading economists in the field on the prospect of Detroit transitioning to some form of land value tax, shows that a majority either agree or strongly agree with the notion that this policy shift would produce economic growth. It's worth noting that the positive impact that SRT would have on local housing affordability would pair pretty well with the zoning liberalization of the kind that we are hopefully going to see come out of Richmond's code refresh process, although it can certainly stand alone as a policy. Most people in this room or watching this video are probably on board with land value taxes already, so I won't belabor these points. What I'm mostly here to provide tonight is analysis about the political prospects of SRT in Richmond. My non-academic experience from over the past 7 years or so has largely been in local electoral politics. During the last two major election cycles for the Richmond city government, those being 2020 and 2024, as well as a special election in 2019, I've either worked for or extensively volunteered for different city council campaigns in 4 out of the 9 districts that Richmond has. During that time, I've also been keeping tabs on basically every candidate running in the city for either city council or mayor that has a position on SRT, which isn't that many of them. We'll get into more of that later. Okay, so in Virginia, we have the Dillon rule, and this is essentially just a requirement that This is a requirement that localities are only really allowed to do what they're expressly authorized to do by the state, in comparison to the home rule model, which says that they're allowed to do anything that they're not disallowed from doing. Out of 133 cities and counties in Virginia, Richmond is one of only 4 that are currently authorized to transition to split rate taxation. Though I should note that there will be that number of 4 will be doubling later this year due to legislation that was passed earlier this year by the Virginia state legislature. Richmond received its permission to make this transition all the way back in mid-2020, thanks to legislation advocated for by then Councilman Andreas Addison and sponsored in the legislature by then State Senator Jennifer McClellan. Addison was at the time that he was on council, the only member to openly advocate for SRT, to my knowledge. He ran for mayor unsuccessfully in 2024. When he lost, this brought the total number of open SRT supporters in Richmond city leadership down from 1 to 0. For those keeping score at home, what you most essentially need to implement this or any other policy is 5+1. You need 5 votes out of the 9 on the city council, unless there's a supermajority requirement, which there isn't for this, and then you need the mayor's sign off. While ideally a policy of this magnitude would be passed by a supermajority or larger margin, 5+1 is the bare bones for what you need. Despite the fact that by one metric we've moved backwards in Richmond in representation of open SRT supporters in Richmond, there are reasons to be optimistic. Under the 5+1 model, Mayor Danny Avula said about last year that he's open to it, basically, if the council wants to move forward with this. Where is the council on SRT? Well, as I mentioned earlier, they're largely undefined. I won't break out who's who on this. The last one, if you know, you know. But the long and short of it is that most of them have not taken a position on SRT. Addison never forced a vote when he was on the council. Of the people that are currently on the council, there aren't that many that took a vote to that effect. There's a lot of room for movement. And this is a double-edged sword, both because people that are currently on the council could resolve their position in favor of SRT or opposed to it. Another factor that's been giving me reasons to think that this is doable in the near term is that most regular residents of Richmond, outside of such illuminated and esteemed gatherings as Strong Towns chapter meetings, are largely unaware that this is even something the city could choose to do, let alone how it would impact their average tax bill. This is another opportunity and another potential peril, because once somebody forms a political impression of a candidate, of a policy, that's largely pretty difficult to change after the fact. This would suggest that one of the best approaches that's available to advocates of SRT is to do targeted voter outreach. The very helpful RVA.tax map and some other projects like it make it so that you can figure out how each parcel of land in the city will be, the residents of it will be financially impacted by SRT. Now you can set the rate of at which the land is taxed at different settings, the same way that you can do this for the tax rate on improvements. On the left here, for example, we have 2 times the rate applied to the value of the land as to improvements. On the right is a full transition to LVT, or not taxing buildings or other improvements at all. And you can largely see the difference between the left and the right is that you get an intensification of, in broad strokes, people that, the closer you get to a pure LVT, the more significant of swing you will see in an average person's, the average impact on their taxes. This map is a little bit more blown up so that I can point out some of the dynamics. You can see, for example, in the District 4 along the river, it's a pretty good amenity living on right on the James River. And accordingly, a transition to SRT would result in those properties seeing an overall increase in taxes, where the land is less valuable, i.e. immediately south, you generally see a net decrease. So a good majority of the District 4's population would see a benefit, at least under this configuration of SRT. There are winners and losers to SRT. There are winners and losers to the current model. The advantage of SRT is that it produces more winners, fewer losers, and the degree to which people are seeing a benefit for more people better than the current models. So I think there are strong economic justice arguments to be made. There are, insofar as this would help the city more sustainably and reliably fund any number of essential city priorities, there's all sorts of other justice arguments to be made. This, to me, suggests that targeted voter outreach to people who would see a decrease in their taxes in order to shore up popular support before proceeding to sequentially lobbying council members on this issue would be the approach that I would recommend. I'm in the process of figuring out how to incorporate these organizational efforts, if at all. Yeah, voter outreach to soften up the ground, proceeding to winning a majority of a simple majority of city councilors that support this reform, and then engaging with the mayor once there is at least a sponsor of this legislation is the rough approach that I would recommend. And you see here there is a secret plans tab, publicity stunts, that sort of thing to get popular attention. You don't necessarily want to give people that much notice on. Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming out tonight.